She looks at him. Her breath catches, and in a trembling whisper, she says the words that freeze Richard in place. "He looks like your dead son." For a moment, time itself seems to stop. The busy streets filled with honking cars, the flashing lights of luxury stores, the cold night air, it all fades into silence. Richard's face tightens. Pain flickers in his eyes, then denial, then a burst of anger he can barely contain. That single sentence tears open a wound he thought had long scarred over. His son, the boy he buried years ago. Sophia, his girlfriend, doesn't take her eyes off the homeless child standing just a few steps away. She's elegant, graceful, but beneath her beauty lies a constant ache, a need to matter, to heal the man she loves, to prove she isn't just decoration on his arm. And in that boy, scruffy, shivering, yet holding a gaze far too wise for his years, she sees something Richard refuses to see. The boy's name is Daniel. His clothes are tattered, his shoes don't match, and his hair looks like it hasn't seen a comb in months. But his eyes, they burn with a quiet intensity. The kind of eyes that tell a story of nights spent on cold sidewalks, of hunger that gnaws at the soul, of battles fought in silence. Eyes that hold both fear and a strange, unshakable dignity. And then there's Richard, a man who built empires with his hands, a man whose name is etched into the skyline of the city itself. People see him as untouchable, powerful, ruthless, a king among men. But what they don't see is the ghost that follows him, the memory of his son, taken from him in an accident that money, power, nor influence could prevent. His success is built on bricks of grief, his smile is carved from sorrow, and his heart, it's locked, guarded, unwilling to let anyone or anything inside. Yet here he stands, face to face with a child who looks like the son he lost, a child who shouldn't matter, but does. A child who may shatter the carefully constructed walls he's built around his broken heart. The city around them blazes with contradictions, towering glass skyscrapers casting shadows over alleys where children like Daniel sleep, wealth and poverty colliding on the same street corner. And in that contrast lies the heart of this story. Privilege clashing with survival, grief colliding with hope, and a moment that will change 3 lives forever. But the question is this: was it just a resemblance, or was fate playing a cruel trick on a grieving man? Before we continue, let me ask you something. If you were Sophia, standing beside a man drowning in memories, would you have spoken those words, "He looks like your dead son," or would you have stayed silent? Think about it, and tell us in the comments below. And if you believe in second chances, in stories that remind us how fragile and beautiful life can be, make sure you subscribe right now, because what's about to unfold will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, loss, and redemption. Richard's jaw clenched as Sophia continued staring at the boy. He hated that look in her eyes, the softness, the sympathy, the way her heart opened to a stranger. To him it wasn't kindness, it was weakness. "Enough," Richard muttered under his breath, pulling at Sophia's arm, trying to steer her away from the homeless child. But Sophia didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed on Daniel, as if she were seeing more than just a hungry boy in ragged clothes. Richard sighed, reached into his wallet, and pulled out a crisp stack of bills. He stepped toward Daniel and extended the money with a dismissive wave, as if tossing scraps to a stray dog. "Take this," he said, his tone sharp. "Get yourself cleaned up, buy something to eat, and don't linger here. This isn't your place." But Daniel didn't reach for the money. His eyes lifted, meeting Richard's without flinching. There was no greed in his stare, no eagerness to grab what was offered. Instead, his voice came quiet, steady, almost too mature for a boy his age. "I don't want your money. I just need food, and maybe a little dignity." The words cut through the night like a blade. Sophia gasped softly, taken aback, while Richard's expression hardened even more. In his world, money was the solution to everything. Problems disappeared when you threw enough wealth at them. But here stood a boy who refused him. Richard shoved the bills into Daniel's hand anyway, but the boy let them fall to the ground. The wind caught the edges, scattering them across the sidewalk. Passers-by glanced at the spectacle, wealth trampled on by someone who had nothing. Sophia bent down, her hands trembling, but Daniel stopped her. "Leave it," he whispered. "I'm not a beggar." And in that moment, Sophia's heart cracked, because those words, so fragile yet so firm, reminded her of another voice, Another face from long ago. Her younger brother. The boy who once stood proud despite being consumed by the shadow of drugs. He had fought to prove he wasn't just an addict, not just a failure, until the day he lost that battle. Sophia swallowed hard, blinking back tears. That's why Daniel felt so familiar. Not just because of his resemblance to Richard's son, but because he mirrored her own brother. She felt that same desperation, that same stubborn pride. She saw not just a boy on the street, but a memory she had never stopped mourning. Richard, however, saw none of this. All he saw was Sophia's compassion slipping from his control, her attention torn away by someone who didn't deserve it. Jealousy, sharp, irrational, stirred in his chest. Why was she looking at this child as though he mattered? Why was she offering him tenderness she rarely showed Richard himself? Daniel shifted uncomfortably, and his story began to unfold in fragments, unprompted. His mother, gone since he was 6. A parade of foster homes that treated him more like a burden than a child. Nights spent curled up behind dumpsters, praying no one would find him. Days where hunger clawed at his stomach until even the thought of food hurt. Yet, somehow, his voice carried no bitterness, only weariness, only truth. Sophia's chest tightened as she listened, each word peeling back layers of a wound she thought had healed years ago. The guilt she carried for her brother's death began to surface. The nights she told herself she could have done more, the days she wondered if love alone could have saved him. Now in Daniel, she saw a chance she never had. A chance to do better. A chance to not walk away this time. But Richard? Richard stood apart, watching the exchange with ice in his eyes. Every detail of Daniel's story scraped against the guilt buried deep in his soul. His own son's death haunted him still. A car accident on a rainy night. He had been behind the wheel. He told himself again and again that it was just fate, that no one could have predicted the slick road, the sudden turn. But deep down, he believed it was his fault. He believed his son would still be alive if he had been more careful. And now, hearing Daniel's story, seeing Sophia lean closer, seeing her eyes shine with empathy, it felt like betrayal. As if she were replacing the memory of his son with this stranger. As if she were offering her heart to someone else. Richard's voice finally snapped through the tension, cold and sharp. He's not my son, and he never will be. Daniel flinched, but his gaze held steady. I never said I was. I'm just trying to survive. Sophia placed a hand on Richard's arm, trying to soften him, but he pulled away. The anger in his chest wasn't just at Daniel. It was at himself, at Sophia, at the cruel reminder of everything he had lost. The three of them stood locked in a triangle of grief, compassion, and suspicion. And beneath it all, the storm of conflict was just beginning. Because Richard couldn't shake the unease in his chest. Daniel was more than a coincidence. He reminded him too much of the boy he buried. The scar, the eyes, even the way he spoke, it was impossible to ignore. And the more Sophia cared, the more Richard felt his grip slipping. But here's the question. Was Richard blinded by grief and jealousy, or was Daniel truly connected to the son he lost? Could a stranger on the street carry pieces of a past that refused to die? Tell me, if you were in Richard's shoes, would you have walked away from Daniel, or would you have listened to what the boy had to say? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see where this story leads, the twists, the heartbreak, the truth waiting to be uncovered, make sure you subscribe right now, because what's coming next will leave you questioning whether fate ever makes mistakes. Richard had convinced himself that Daniel was nothing more than a coincidence. Just another street boy with a passing resemblance to the son he had lost. But the mind plays cruel tricks on the grieving heart. The more Richard tried to ignore him, the more the details clawed their way back into his thoughts. A simple gesture, Daniel brushing his hair back with his left hand, was identical to the habit his son once had. A quiet phrase Daniel muttered under his breath. One day, I'll see the ocean. The exact dream his son used to whisper on long car rides. And then there was the scar. A small, faint mark on Daniel's temple, curved almost the same way as the one Richard's son had gotten from falling off a bicycle years ago. At first, Richard told himself it was nothing. Coincidence. Imagination. But the similarities kept stacking, piling onto his chest like stones until he could no longer breathe. Sophia noticed the change in him, the way Richard's eyes lingered on Daniel when he thought no one was watching. The way he clenched his fists when the boy laughed, because that laugh echoed too close to a memory he wanted buried. Sophia, unlike Richard, couldn't let it go. She needed answers. She needed to know who Daniel really was. One evening, while Richard buried himself in his office, drowning his pain in whiskey and silence, Sophia began her own search. Quietly, carefully, she asked questions around the neighborhood. She spoke to vendors who had seen Daniel scavenge for scraps, to other homeless kids who sometimes shared an alley with him. And the stories she heard sent shivers down her spine. Daniel's mother, they said, once worked for a wealthy family in the city. She disappeared years ago, leaving her child behind to wander the system of foster homes. Some whispered that the father had been powerful, maybe even rich, but his identity was never known. Sophia pieced the fragments together like shards of broken glass, and slowly a picture began to form. Could Daniel be connected to Richard's own family? The thought terrified her. It thrilled her. It explained so much, and yet it also threatened everything. Meanwhile, Richard's patience with Daniel thinned. He wanted to end it once and for all. Standing tall, his voice cold as steel, he confronted the boy. "You don't belong here. You're not my responsibility. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now." He shoved another envelope of money into Daniel's hands, desperate to be rid of him. But just like before, Daniel refused. His voice cracked, but his eyes never wavered. "I don't want your money. I want to know why. Why your son had the same scar as me. Why he dreamed of the same ocean I dream of. Why I know things I shouldn't know." Richard's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he felt the world tilt beneath him. "What did you just say?" he demanded. Daniel looked straight into his eyes. "He used to say, 'The ocean is where everything feels alive again.' I've said those same words since I was a kid, but no one ever taught them to me. I just knew them." Sophia's heart raced. Richard staggered back, his mind spinning. Those words, those exact words had belonged to his son. They weren't written anywhere. They weren't in any photograph or letter. They were spoken only in the quiet moments between father and son. How could this boy possibly know them? The truth pressed closer, suffocating, but Richard refused to surrender to it. His anger, his fear, his guilt, everything inside him roared against the possibility. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice trembling more from dread than fury. "You're lying. You're trying to trick me, and I won't fall for it." But even as he said the words, doubt gnawed at his soul. Because what if it wasn't a lie? What if fate, in its cruel, mysterious way, had placed this boy in front of him for a reason? Sophia stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Richard, we can't ignore this anymore. There are too many pieces that fit. We have to find out the truth." And that night, she made her decision. Even if Richard wouldn't seek answers, she would. But the more she uncovered, the more dangerous the truth became. Because hidden in Daniel's story was a revelation that could destroy Richard's carefully guarded empire, or heal a wound that had never closed. The question now lingered like a shadow over them all. Was Daniel truly connected to Richard's past, or was he weaving a deception born of desperation? What do you think? Could a homeless boy really carry the echoes of a life once lost? Or was this all a cruel trick of grief and chance? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want to see how deep this mystery goes, and whether Richard will finally confront the truth he's been running from, make sure you subscribe right now, because the next chapter will shake everything you thought you knew about this story. Richard could no longer contain the storm boiling inside him. Too many coincidences, too many shadows of the past haunting him through this boy. His patience snapped. His voice thundered through the night, sharp enough to make Daniel flinch. "Enough games? Who are you? Tell me the truth right now." Daniel's lips trembled, his body stiffening as tears welled in his eyes. For weeks he had endured Richard's coldness, his suspicion, his attempts to buy him off. But this demand was the moment Daniel had dreaded, and the moment he could no longer avoid. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I don't know who my father is. My mother, she told me nothing. She worked for a family once, a wealthy family, but she left before I was old enough to remember. She died when I was a child, and no one ever told me the truth. I've spent my life in the shadows, searching for a place I belong, and when I saw you, something inside me broke. I thought, maybe, you could be the answer I've been searching for." Sophia's breath caught, her heart breaking at the sight of Daniel's vulnerability. She stepped closer, but Richard was too consumed by his rage and grief to soften. You think you can walk into my life? Drag my son's memory out of the grave and pretend you belong here? Richard's voice shook. You are not him. My son is dead, dead, and nothing you say, nothing you do, will ever bring him back. Daniel's tears spilled down his cheeks, but his voice grew steadier, stronger, fueled by the fire of years spent surviving when the world had abandoned him. I never said I was your son. I'm not trying to replace him. I just want a chance to be seen as more than the dirt on the street, a chance to live, to matter. Is that so much to ask? His words cut deeper than any blade, slicing through Richard's anger to the raw grief beneath. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Sophia looked between them, her heart splitting in two. Then she cried out, her voice trembling but fierce. Stop this, both of you. Richard, look at him. Look at yourself. This isn't about replacing your son. This is about love, about humanity. Are we defined only by blood, or by the love we choose to give, even when it hurts? Her words hung in the air, a question so heavy it demanded an answer. Richard's face crumpled, torn between rage and sorrow, between denial and the fragile hope that terrified him more than anything else. But Daniel wasn't finished. He swallowed hard, then revealed the truth he had carried all along. My mother's name was Grace. She worked for a wealthy family before she disappeared. She used to tell me stories about a mansion with marble floors, about a man who never looked her way, but whose shadow fell over her life. That's all I know. That's all I've ever had. The name hit Richard like a thunderclap. Grace, he remembered her. Quiet, kind, a young woman who had once worked in his household, long before tragedy consumed his life. Memories he had buried came rushing back, and with them, a dawning horror. Could it be? Could Daniel truly be her child, and his? The ground seemed to shift beneath Richard's feet. Suddenly, the resemblance was no longer just a trick of grief. The scar, the words, the habits, they weren't coincidences. They were blood. They were lineage. They were the undeniable echoes of a connection Richard had never acknowledged. His chest heaved as he staggered back, the weight of revelation pressing on him. If Daniel was truly Grace's son, then he was more than just a reminder of the boy Richard had lost. He might, in fact, be Richard's own flesh and blood. Sophia gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands. The truth, so long hidden, now lay bare between them. Richard's voice broke, softer than it had been in years. If what you're saying is true, then you're not just a boy on the street. You're my son. Daniel fell to his knees, sobbing, not with despair, but with the release of a lifetime of questions finally finding answers. Sophia's tears flowed freely, her heart pounding with the enormity of what had just been revealed. Three souls, bound by fate, by blood, by love and pain, stood at the edge of transformation. Nothing would ever be the same again. But here's the question that lingers. If love can define a family as much as blood, which would you choose if you were in Richard's shoes? Deny the past or embrace the future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see how this revelation changes everything, how Richard, Daniel, and Sophia face the final choice that will define their lives forever, make sure you subscribe right now, because the conclusion will leave you breathless. For a long, trembling moment, silence wrapped itself around the room. Richard stood frozen, torn between the weight of revelation and the fear of opening his heart once again. Daniel, broken and vulnerable, waited with eyes full of pleading, not for wealth, not for comfort, but for recognition, for love. Then, slowly, painfully, Richard stepped forward. His hands, once clenched with anger, softened. He reached out, and with a voice stripped bare of pride, whispered, "You're not a replacement. You never were. But if you'll let me, I want to try again. Not as a grieving man clinging to the past, but as a father who was given a second chance." Daniel collapsed into his arms, sobbing. The years of loneliness, rejection, and silence poured out of him in a flood of tears. And in that embrace, something shifted, not only in Daniel, but in Richard as well. The walls he had built, brick by brick, to keep grief at bay finally cracked. Love, once lost, returned. Not in the same form, but in a new and unexpected way. Sophia's eyes glistened as she watched, her heart swelling with both relief and pride. For weeks she had fought for compassion, for understanding, for a bridge between two broken souls. And now, standing there, she realized that her role had not been small. She had been the voice of reason, the beating heart that reminded them both that love was not limited by blood nor erased by loss. The mansion, once a symbol of emptiness and grief, seemed warmer now. Its walls no longer echoed with sorrow, but with the possibility of healing. For the first time in years, it felt like a home again. And so, together, Richard, Sophia, and Daniel walked through the grand doors of the mansion. The sight was striking. A boy who once slept in the cold shadows of the streets now stepping into a place of warmth and security beside the man who had once turned him away. The contrast was undeniable, wealth and street life colliding in one symbolic image of hope, forgiveness, and rebirth. Because wealth can buy comfort, yes, it can clothe the body, feed the stomach, and shelter the weary. But only love, only forgiveness, has the power to rebuild the soul. Sophia's voice echoed in their minds, her words becoming a lesson not only for Richard and Daniel, but for anyone who might listen. Compassion is the bridge between despair and redemption. And isn't it true that prejudice blinds us? How many Daniels have we passed on the streets, writing them off as nothing more than shadows, when in reality, they carry stories, scars, and hearts as human as ours? How many have we denied simply because we judged their clothes, their smell, their circumstance, without ever seeing their humanity? Richard, who once thought his wealth insulated him from loss, finally understood the truth. Wealth cannot shield a man from grief. But love, freely given, fiercely defended, can pull even the most shattered soul back into the light. The night closed on a new beginning. The grieving father found a son. The lonely boy found a home. And Sophia, the quiet force between them, proved that compassion can heal wounds deeper than wealth ever could. So I ask you, if someone stood before you, reminding you of the child you lost, would you shut your heart, or would you see it as a second chance at love? And if you believe, like Richard and Sophia, that everyone deserves a second chance, then make sure you subscribe right now, because stories like this remind us that humanity isn't defined by what we own, but by the love we give.